Imagine receiving a phone call that changes everything. My daughter's cold voice on the line. Mom, just letting you know, we sold the house, okay? Good luck, bye. No discussion, no consent. Just my own child selling my home right out from under me while I sat in a doctor's office, worried about my heart. What Madison didn't know was that 3 years ago, before my beloved John died, he had quietly transferred the house into my name alone. As I watched my daughter dismantle my life, hiring movers, inviting buyers to tour my home, planning to ship me off to a depressing retirement facility, I kept this secret close, because sometimes silence is the most devastating weapon of all, and when the truth finally emerged, it would change both our lives forever. This is a story about betrayal, justice, and the quiet ways we protect the ones we love, even after they're gone. Follow my channel for more real-life stories that will break your heart and heal it again. Like and comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what you would have done in my shoes. I was sitting in the doctor's office, that cold antiseptic smell clinging to my throat, and my eyes fixed on the frosted steel door in front of me. It was just a routine checkup, but my heart hadn't been beating right for weeks. My fingers trembled. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. That's when my cell phone rang. The screen showed my daughter's name, Madison. I smiled weakly. It was rare for her to call, and when she did, it was out of necessity, never affection. I answered with hope, but I didn't even have time to say hello. From the other end came a hurried voice, cold, almost rehearsed. Mom, just letting you know, we sold the house, okay? The buyer closes everything tomorrow. You're going to that place I showed you in the email, remember? Anyway, good luck. Bye. She hung up. I sat there, frozen, staring at nothing. The doctor walked in, but I didn't hear his name or what he was saying. I only remember laughing loudly like a crazy old woman. He looked at me alarmed and asked if I wanted water. What I wanted was justice. But in that moment, all I had was emptiness. And that detail she forgot, oh, that one, was going to make history. You see, I'm 68 years old, and Madison is my only daughter. After her father died 3 years ago, she started treating me like I was already in the grave myself, calling less, visiting never, speaking to me in that slow, condescending voice people use with toddlers and senile old folks. The house she was talking about? It's the Victorian on Maple Street where I've lived for 42 years, where I raised her, where I buried 2 dogs, a cat, and all my dreams, where I nursed my husband through cancer until he took his final breath in our bedroom upstairs. And the place she mentioned in her email? A dismal little room in Sunny Pines retirement community, the cheapest option she could find. I never agreed to go there. She never asked if I wanted to. The doctor, Dr. Richards, I finally noticed his name tag, was still staring at me, concerned by my inappropriate laughter. Mrs. Sullivan, are you all right? Your blood pressure is quite elevated. I wiped tears from my eyes. Whether from laughter or grief, I couldn't tell anymore. Oh, I'm just dandy, doctor. My daughter just sold my house right out from under me, without my permission, while I'm sitting here waiting to find out if my heart is failing. His eyes widened. She can't do that legally, can she? And that's when it hit me. The memory of that rainy Tuesday when John, my late husband, had insisted we visit his lawyer. How he'd made me sign those papers. How he'd looked me in the eyes and said, Helen, this house is yours, only yours, no matter what happens. I started laughing again, this time with something wicked dancing in my chest. No, doctor, no, she can't. And that's the beautiful part she doesn't know yet. Dr. Richards looked genuinely concerned now. Mrs. Sullivan, perhaps we should run some additional tests. This stress isn't good for your heart. I stood up suddenly, grabbing my purse. Actually, doctor, I feel better than I have in months. Sometimes the best medicine is watching karma do its work. As I walked out, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Movers coming tomorrow at 10. Be ready. I smiled at my phone, feeling a strange lightness. For the first time since John died, I felt him beside me again, like we were sharing a private joke at Madison's expense. Because the house she sold, the Victorian on Maple Street, with the peeling paint and creaking porch. It wasn't hers to sell. It was mine, all mine, and I had the papers to prove it. I drove home from the doctor's office with trembling hands, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Should I laugh or cry? The beautiful autumn leaves blurred through my tears as I navigated the familiar streets of my neighborhood, streets I had walked for over 4 decades. Streets where John and I had pushed Madison in her stroller, where we taught her to ride a bike, where neighbors had become family. When I pulled into the driveway of my Victorian home, I sat there for a moment just staring. The peeling blue paint, the slightly crooked shutters, the porch swing John had installed when we first moved in. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every imperfection told a story. As I walked up the path, Mrs. Hensley from next door waved. "Helen, how was your appointment?" Her kind face creased with concern. I forced a smile. "Oh, just routine. Nothing to worry about." I couldn't tell her. Couldn't speak the betrayal out loud. Not yet. When I entered, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood embraced me. This house had its own perfume, a mix of beeswax polish, the faint mustiness of old books, and the lingering ghost of John's pipe tobacco that no amount of cleaning could ever fully remove. I breathed it in deeply, like a drowning woman gulping air. The grandfather clock in the hallway, John's pride and joy, chimed 3 times. That clock had marked every significant moment of our lives together. It had chimed when we brought baby Madison home from the hospital. It had chimed the night John told me about his diagnosis. It had chimed as I sat alone after his funeral, numb with grief. I walked slowly through each room, touching things, remembering. The dining table where we'd had countless family dinners. The living room where Madison had opened Christmas presents. The kitchen where John and I had danced on our 30th anniversary, laughing as we bumped into the counter. Finally, I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now. I hadn't changed much since John passed. His reading glasses still sat on his nightstand. His slippers still waited by his side of the bed, as if he might step into them at any moment. I sometimes talked to him in the quiet hours of night, when the loneliness felt most acute. I went to his dresser, solid oak that we'd bought at an antique store in Burlington when we were first married. The top drawer stuck slightly, the way it always had. John had called it the important drawer. It's where he kept things that mattered. With slightly shaking hands, I pulled it open. The familiar scent of cedar and his aftershave wafted up, making my eyes sting with fresh tears. Inside lay his pocket watch, a few faded photographs, the ticket stubs from our first date to see The Godfather. And there, in the back corner, was what I was looking for. An old brown leather portfolio, cracked with age, its brass clasp tarnished. I carried it to the bed and sat down, running my fingers over the soft leather. John had gotten this portfolio when he graduated law school, long before we met. It had traveled with him through his entire career, filled with different papers over the decades. Inside, nestled among yellowed letters and a faded photograph of us in New Orleans during our honeymoon, was the house deed, the original deed, drawn up 3 years ago when John was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He'd insisted on transferring everything to my name alone. "To protect what's yours," he'd said, his once strong hand squeezing mine, "in case anything happens." I remembered arguing with him, not wanting to face what was coming. But John was always practical, always thinking ahead, always protecting me. I stared at the document, my name, Helen Marie Sullivan, typed neatly on the line where once both our names had been. The house was mine, legally, indisputably mine. Madison had no right to sell it, no right to force me into that depressing retirement home. I hadn't told her about the transfer. After John passed, she'd taken over handling the finances, the taxes, everything. She'd assumed the house was still in both our names, with her as the inheritor. She never asked, and I never corrected her assumption. I suppose part of me didn't want to believe I'd ever need this protection from my own daughter. I carefully returned the deed to the portfolio and put everything back in John's drawer. I didn't call Madison, didn't text her about her colossal mistake. I simply closed the drawer and smiled, because sometimes silence is the most devastating trap of all. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The same swing where John and I had spent countless evenings, where he'd held my hand and told me he loved me for the last time. "You were right, John," I whispered to the evening breeze. "You were right to protect me." Tomorrow would bring its own storm. Madison would arrive with her movers and her self-importance. The buyer would come with his checkbook and his plans for my home, and I would be waiting with 42 years of patience and a mother's broken heart. I barely slept that night, the weight of what was coming pressed on my chest like a stone. I kept reaching for John's side of the bed, forgetting, as I sometimes still did after 3 years, that he wasn't there to hold my hand through this. By 6 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and shuffled downstairs to make coffee. The morning light filtered through the stained glass panel above the kitchen door, another of John's treasures, salvaged from a church demolition in 1989. It cast blue and amber patterns across the worn linoleum floor. How many mornings had I stood in this exact spot, watching those colored lights dance? How many more would I have? At precisely 9:47, I remember checking the grandfather clock. A sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. Madison stepped out, wearing those ridiculous oversized sunglasses that made her look like a movie star trying to hide from paparazzi. She was followed by a tall man in an expensive-looking gray suit, the real estate agent, I presumed. They stood in my driveway for a moment, heads bent together in conversation. I could see her gesturing toward the house, pointing at the roof, shaking her head, already making excuses for its imperfections. I didn't go out to greet them. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around my coffee mug, and waited. At 10:03, another car arrived, a shiny silver Mercedes. A young man got out, probably in his mid-30s, with that polished, confident look of someone who'd never known real hardship. The buyer, Dr. Someone or Other. Madison had mentioned his name on the phone yesterday, but it had slipped away like water through my fingers. I watched through the lace curtains as Madison greeted him with an enthusiastic handshake and that brilliant smile she reserved for people she wanted to impress. The same smile she'd used when introducing me to her college boyfriend, the one who'd broken her heart junior year. The same smile she'd flashed at John's funeral when accepting condolences from his law partners. The doorbell rang, its familiar chime echoing through the house. I took my time answering it. "Mom!" Madison's voice was artificially bright as she air-kissed my cheek. "You're up. I was worried we might wake you." I smiled thinly. "I've been up since dawn, dear." She gestured to the men behind her. "This is Charles Winthrop, our agent, and Dr. Ethan Bradley, who's buying the house." Dr. Bradley extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan. Your daughter's told me so much about this beautiful home." Had she now? I wondered what exactly Madison had told him. Had she mentioned the crack in the dining room ceiling that appeared after the '98 earthquake? The temperamental radiator in the upstairs bathroom? The way the third step from the top creaked no matter how many times John had tried to fix it? "Has she?" I replied, shaking his hand limply. "How fascinating." Madison shot me a warning look, the kind mothers usually give misbehaving children, not the other way around. "Doctor, Bradley wants to see the whole house," she said, already ushering him inside. "We're on a bit of a schedule." I stepped aside, watching as they invaded my space. Charles, the agent, immediately began taking photos with his phone. Dr. Bradley walked slowly, hands clasped behind his back like he was touring a museum. Madison hovered beside him, pointing out features with theatrical gestures. "Original hardwood floors throughout," she was saying. "And the fireplace in the living room is working, though Mom hardly ever uses it." They moved through my home like I was invisible, discussing renovations and potential, as if I weren't standing right there. Dr. Bradley paused in the living room, looking up at the ceiling. "These walls could come down," he said, tracing an imaginary line with his finger. "Open it all up. Make it one big entertainment space." The walls he wanted to demolish were the ones John and I had painted together the weekend we moved in, laughing as we got more paint on each other than on the plaster. It would make a fantastic event space with some minor renovations, Dr. Bradley continued, his eyes gleaming with plans. He looked at me briefly, as if suddenly remembering I existed. You've maintained it beautifully, Mrs. Sullivan. I said nothing, just stood there, clutching my coffee mug like a shield. They moved to the kitchen next. Madison opened cabinets without asking, showing off the built-ins John had crafted himself. Dr. Bradley ran his hand along the countertop, where I'd kneaded thousands of loaves of bread, rolled out Christmas cookies with Madison when she was small, prepared countless family meals. The appliances are a bit dated, Madison said apologetically, but the space has good bones. Dated? I finally spoke. That stove is a 1958 O'Keefe and Merritt. They don't make them like that anymore. Madison ignored me, steering Dr. Bradley toward the backyard. I followed at a distance, listening as they discussed tearing out my garden to install a pool. In the kitchen, I overheard Charles, the agent, speaking in hushed tones on his phone. Then Madison slipped away from the tour and joined him. I positioned myself near the doorway, just out of sight. If we don't close today, I'm screwed, Madison whispered frantically. I've already put a deposit on the new apartment in Boston. David can't find out. David, her husband of 12 years, father of my only grandchild. Did he know about this sale, about her plans for me? Just get her signature, Charles replied. We can handle the rest. Madison sighed. She's being difficult. More than usual. More than usual? When had I ever been difficult? I'd supported her through college, helped plan her wedding, babysat little Emma whenever asked. I'd swallowed my grief when she moved 3 states away, limiting my time with my granddaughter to FaceTime calls and occasional holidays. I retreated to the living room before they could spot me eavesdropping. Dr. Bradley was examining the built-in bookshelves, pulling out volumes at random. Will these books be gone? He asked when Madison returned. Of course, she replied smoothly. Mom's taking her personal items to her new place. My new place. A single room with a shared bathroom at Sunny Pines, where John's books, his beloved first edition Hemingways and Steinbecks, would have nowhere to go. I said nothing, just stood silently watching as my daughter sold my life piece by piece. Every silence was another loop of rope tightening around her neck, a noose of her own making that she couldn't even see. 2 days later, the moving truck arrived. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind that had always made me want to bake apple pies and simmer cinnamon cider on the stove. Instead, I sat at my kitchen window, watching strange men in uniform unload empty boxes onto my driveway. The logo on the side of the truck read, "Elite Relocations, we move what matters." The irony wasn't lost on me. Madison pulled up in her SUV at 9:30 sharp. She was dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she wore latex gloves like she was about to perform surgery rather than pack up her mother's life. She didn't knock, just used her key and walked in like she owned the place, which I suppose she thought she did. "Morning, Mom," she said briskly, barely glancing my way. "The movers are here. They'll start with the big furniture, so we need to get your personal items packed first." I nodded, watching as she directed 2 burly men toward the dining room. They began dismantling my table, the table where John had helped Madison with her homework, where we'd celebrated 40 Thanksgivings, where I'd sat alone every morning since his passing, drinking tea and talking to his empty chair. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Madison paused her furious typing on her phone. "No thanks. We've got a lot to do today." She didn't even look up. More movers streamed in, armed with packing tape and bubble wrap. They invaded every corner of my home like a well-organized army. One young man with tattoos covering his arms began wrapping my china, the wedding set John's mother had given us, each piece still perfect after nearly 5 decades. "Be careful with those," I said. "They were my mother-in-law's." He nodded respectfully. At least someone acknowledged me. Madison was in the living room directing another worker to take down the family photos from the wall. My entire history was being stripped away, frame by frame. John and me on our wedding day, Madison's graduation from Penn State, Baby Emma's first Christmas. The last family photo we took before John got sick, all of us smiling on the beach in Cape Cod, unaware of what was coming. These can all go in one box, Madison instructed. Label it Mom's photos, as if my memories were just another category of items to be catalogued and stored. I wandered upstairs, where more workers were emptying closets and drawers. A middle-aged woman was folding my clothes with mechanical efficiency. Another was boxing up my jewelry box, including the pearl necklace John had given me on our 30th anniversary. In our bedroom, my bedroom, Madison was directing a man to dismantle the bed frame. "We're donating this," she told him. "It won't fit in her new place." The bed John and I had shared for 40 years. The bed where we'd conceived her. The bed where he'd held my hand through the long night after my father died. The bed where I'd cradled him in those final weeks, counting his breaths as they grew farther apart. "Donating it," I whispered. Madison finally looked at me, irritation flashing across her face. "Mom, there's no room for a queen-sized bed at Sunny Pines. You'll have a single. It's perfectly adequate." Adequate. Like I was being rationed just enough space to exist, but not to live. I retreated to the bathroom and locked the door, stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink where John had stood every morning for 40 years, shaving with the same safety razor his father had used. The crow's feet around my eyes had deepened since his death. My hair, once chestnut brown like Madison's, had faded to a soft gray. When had I gotten so old? When had my daughter stopped seeing me? A knock on the door startled me. "Mrs. Sullivan," a gruff voice called. "We need to pack up the bathroom now." I splashed cold water on my face and opened the door. The bathroom was quickly stripped of its familiarity. My lotions and creams boxed up. The shower curtain John had picked out, with sailing ships because he'd always wanted to learn to sail, taken down. The nautical-themed towels Madison had always hated removed from their racks. Downstairs, the house was being hollowed out room by room. The grandfather clock was carefully wrapped and carried out to the truck. The bookshelf in the living room stood empty, its contents packed away in boxes labeled simply books. John's beloved leather armchair, the one I still couldn't bring myself to sit in, was carried out by two men who didn't know its significance. In the kitchen, the moving foreman approached me with a clipboard. "Ma'am, who will be signing the release for the house? We need authorization before we finish loading." Madison swooped in before I could answer. "I'll sign it. I have power of attorney." A lie. She had never been given power of attorney. John and I had discussed it after his diagnosis, but had ultimately decided against it. We'd seen too many elderly friends stripped of their dignity by well-meaning children. "You have the papers?" the foreman asked. Madison's cheeks flushed slightly. "They're at the airport with my lawyer. He's flying in later today." She gestured dismissively toward me. "The lady here is just a resident. She doesn't own the property anymore. Just a resident. Not my mother. Not Mrs. Sullivan. Just an old woman taking up space that no longer belonged to her." I looked at her then. Really looked at her. Saw the stranger my daughter had become. And for the first time in decades, I found my voice. "Are you sure about that, Madison?" I asked, my tone steady and clear. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. In that moment, I saw something else in her eyes, the first glimmer of fear. The moving truck left that evening, taking with it the physical remnants of my life with John. The house felt hollow, like a shell washed clean by the tide. Most of the furniture was gone, leaving dust outlines on the hardwood floors, ghost shapes of what once had been. I wandered from room to room in the half-darkness, trailing my fingers along bare walls where family photos had hung just hours before. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator out of habit, only to find it nearly empty. Madison had instructed the movers to clean out the perishables, leaving behind only a half carton of milk, some butter, and a jar of strawberry jam that John had always disliked. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the cool metal against my back. The clock on the microwave blinked 9:47 p.m. Madison had left around 6, after instructing me to be ready for tomorrow's final walkthrough with Dr. Bradley. She hadn't asked if I had dinner, hadn't asked where I would sleep with my bed, now loaded onto a truck. Hadn't asked how I felt watching my life dismantled piece by piece. I made myself a slice of toast with the remaining bread and jam, eating it standing at the counter like a stranger in my own home. Then I shuffled to the living room, where the movers had left behind the old corduroy couch, deemed too worn for donation apparently. I had a single blanket, rescued from the linen closet before it was emptied, and one pillow from my bed. This would be my last night in the home where I'd spent nearly half a century. Sleep evaded me, as it often did since John's passing. Around midnight, I gave up trying and padded to his study in my slippers. This room had been left mostly untouched, deemed too cluttered and unimportant by Madison's efficient packing machine. John's desk still stood against the wall, his leather chair pushed neatly underneath. The bookshelves still held his law books, too technical to interest the movers or Madison. I sat in his chair, breathing in the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco and leather conditioner. The desk lamp cast a warm pool of light across the worn surface, where he'd written briefs, paid bills, and penned love notes to me on Valentine's days. I ran my hand over a water ring near the edge, evidence of a whiskey glass placed carelessly one late night as he worked. The bottom right drawer had always stuck slightly. John had meant to fix it, but never got around to it. I tugged it open, smiling at the familiar resistance. Inside was a dusty bottle of Macallan 18, his favorite scotch, saved for special occasions. Behind it lay a small velvet box containing cufflinks I'd given him on our 25th anniversary. And there, at the very back, was his Rolodex. John had stubbornly refused to digitize his contacts, preferring the tactile satisfaction of flipping through cards. I spun it now, watching the cards blur past. So many names, some familiar, some forgotten. I stopped at P and found what I was looking for. Peterson Milton, John's lawyer and our friend for over 30 years. I checked the time, 12:37 a.m. Too late to call, of course, but I could email him. John's ancient desktop computer still sat on the desk, having been deemed worthless by Madison's ruthless assessment. I powered it up, the familiar whirring and clicking bringing an unexpected lump to my throat. The email was simple. Milton, it's Helen Sullivan. Need the original deed to the house ASAP. Madison is selling it. Call me when you get this. I added my cell number and hit send, then shut down the computer. A strange calm had settled over me, the kind that comes with action after too long in passivity's grip. I spent the rest of that night in John's chair, dozing fitfully until dawn broke. The early morning light filtered through the dusty blinds, painting stripes across the empty room. I made myself a cup of instant coffee, all that remained in the pantry, and sat on the porch steps, watching as the neighborhood came to life around me. Mrs. Hensley walked by with her Yorkshire Terrier, waving cheerfully as always. The Morales children waited for the school bus at the corner, their bright backpacks like flags against the gray morning. The paper boy, though he was at least 60, tossed the Burlington Gazette onto porches with practiced precision. This had been my view for decades, the rhythm of my days. At precisely 8:03 a.m., my phone rang. Milton Peterson's voice was a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. Helen, got your email. What in God's name is going on? Madison selling the house? That's not possible. I explained the situation as succinctly as I could, my voice steadier than I expected. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end. She doesn't know, does she? Milton finally asked. No, I replied. John and I never told her about the transfer. Another pause. Then, I'll scan the deed and email it to you right now. And Helen, you call me if you need anything else. Anything at all. The email arrived within minutes. I had to walk to the public library 3 blocks away to print it. But by noon, I had the document in hand, crisp black ink on white paper, stating unequivocally that I, Helen Marie Sullivan, was the sole owner of 1482 Maple Street. Back at the house, I placed the deed in the center of the kitchen table, next to a framed photograph of John holding baby Emma on his lap, his face alight with grandfatherly pride. It was one of the few pictures Madison's movers had overlooked, having fallen behind the microwave during their efficient purge. I positioned it carefully next to the deed, aligning the edges perfectly. Then I waited. Madison arrived at 2:17 p.m., already irritated and barking into her phone. I watched through the window as she paced the driveway, gesticulating wildly. When she finally came inside, her face was flushed with stress. "Mom, why aren't you ready? Doctor, Bradley will be here any minute to do the final walkthrough before closing." She glanced around the kitchen, her eyes skimming over the table without really seeing it. "And why are you still here? I told you the transportation to Sunny Pines would be here at noon." I said nothing, just nodded toward the table. Madison followed my gaze, finally noticing the document and photograph. She picked up the deed, scanning it quickly, then read it again, more slowly. The color drained from her face. This is impossible," she whispered. I looked at my daughter with tired eyes. "You sold the wrong house, dear." She collapsed into a chair, the paper trembling in her hands. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably Dr. Bradley announcing his arrival. But she didn't move to answer it. Instead, she stared at me, seeing me, truly seeing me, for what felt like the first time in years. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed, putting it on speaker. "Charles, it's Madison. We have a problem. A big problem." The real estate agent's voice filled the kitchen. "What now? The buyer is 5 minutes away." "The house," Madison's voice broke. "It's not in my name. It's only in my mother's name. The sale. It can't go through." There was a heavy silence, broken only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the now empty hallway. "Are you kidding me?" Charles finally exploded. "The paperwork you showed me listed both names. You said you had power of attorney." Madison looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I did. I don't know what I thought." For the first time since John died, I felt myself truly awaken from grief's long slumber. And that night, I slept peacefully in John's old office chair, wrapped in a single blanket, but warmed by the knowledge that he was still protecting me, even from beyond the grave. The week that followed was like watching a sand castle collapse under its own weight. Madison's carefully constructed life began to crumble, one grain at a time, while I observed from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with the weary resignation of someone who has seen too much of human folly to be surprised by its consequences. It began with Dr. Bradley. He arrived that day as scheduled, his silver Mercedes purring into my driveway exactly at 2:30 p.m. I watched from the kitchen window as Madison met him outside, her body language a study in desperation. Even through the closed window, I could hear fragments of her frantic explanation. Dr. Bradley's face transformed from confusion to disbelief to cold anger. He gestured sharply toward the house, my house, then checked his watch with exaggerated emphasis. When Madison tried to touch his arm, he jerked away, as if burned. The last I saw of Dr. Ethan Bradley was his Mercedes accelerating down my street, gravel spitting from beneath the tires. Madison stood in the driveway for a long moment, shoulders slumped before slinking back inside. "He wants his earnest money back," she said hollowly, collapsing into a kitchen chair. "All of it, by tomorrow, or he's suing." I said nothing, just poured her a glass of water. She didn't drink it. "How am I supposed to get $50,000 by tomorrow?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. $50,000! The number hung in the air between us like smoke. What had she been planning to do with all that money from selling my home? Certainly not spend it on my care at Sunny Pines, which I knew from my own research cost less than $3,000 a month. "I'm sure Charles can help you sort it out," I finally said, my voice neutral. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Charles, right!" She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the few remaining pictures on the walls. Through the window, I watched her climb into her SUV and peel away, phone already pressed to her ear. 3 days passed in strange silence. Madison didn't call. I began the slow process of reclaiming my home, retrieving what I could from the boxes the movers had left behind in their haste. Milton Peterson stopped by with a bottle of John's favorite scotch, and we sat on my nearly empty porch, drinking to my late husband's foresight. You know, Milton said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, John always said Madison was too much like him. Stubborn, proud, quick to act. He worried about that. I smiled faintly. He was right, but he was also patient and kind. She only got half his qualities. Milton nodded thoughtfully. What will you do now, Helen? About the house, I mean. I gazed out at the darkening street, at the home where I'd lived most of my adult life. Keep it, I suppose. It's all I have left of him. It wasn't until Friday that the rest of Madison's world imploded. The morning was crisp and bright, one of those perfect autumn days that Vermont specializes in. I was in the garden, salvaging what I could of my perennials after the neglect of the past week, when a black Audi screeched to a halt in front of my house. David, Madison's husband, burst from the driver's side, his normally composed banker's face contorted with rage. He didn't notice me kneeling among the chrysanthemums as he stormed up the walkway and pounded on my front door. I stood slowly, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. David, I'm out here. He whirled, startled. Helen, I'm sorry. I thought Madison would be here. I haven't seen her since Tuesday, I said, removing my gloves. Would you like to come in for some tea? His laugh was harsh, brittle. Tea? No, I don't want tea. I want to know why my wife emptied our joint account, took out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, and put a deposit on a luxury condo in Boston. And why the realtor she's apparently been sleeping with just called our home looking for her. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. I sank onto the garden bench, processing this cascade of information. Madison had always been headstrong, impulsive even, but this level of deception was beyond anything I had imagined. Boston? I asked weakly. It was the only word I could manage. David ran a hand through his thinning hair. A penthouse on the harbor, $1.2 million. The mortgage broker called to verify some information. His voice cracked. She used Emma's college fund as part of the down payment. Emma, my granddaughter. 11 years old, brilliant at mathematics, collector of snow globes, afraid of thunderstorms. The thought of her future being sacrificed for whatever fantasy Madison was chasing made something harden inside me. Come inside, David, I said firmly. You look like you could use something stronger than tea. In John's study, I poured 2 generous glasses of his Macallan. David drank his in one swallow, then stared at the empty glass as if it might offer answers. I knew we were having problems, he said quietly. But this, and Charles Winthrop. He's been to our house for dinner, played golf with me. All while, he couldn't finish the sentence. I thought of the whispered conversation I'd overheard in my kitchen, the secret plans, the lies. She tried to sell my house, I told him, without my knowledge or consent. Lied about having power of attorney. David's head snapped up. What? I explained everything. The sudden phone call, the movers, the discovery of the deed. With each detail, his expression shifted from shock to disgust. Her grandparents, he said suddenly. Louise and Harold, they need to know. Madison's in-laws, wealthy, respected pillars of Burlington society. Harold had served on the city council for decades. Louise ran the Historical Society and 3 charitable foundations. They're on their way back from their cruise, landing tonight. David checked his watch. I need to tell them before she can spin some story. As he stood to leave, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face hardening. It's Madison. Says she's at the airport, that there's been a misunderstanding about the house sale. Wants me to wire money to fix it. He looked at me, eyes filled with a cold resolve I'd never seen in my gentle son-in-law. She doesn't know that I know about any of it. I walked him to the door. This man who had been part of my family for 12 years, now a fellow casualty in Madison's wreckage. What will you do? I asked. His smile was grim. Change the locks. Call my lawyer. Protect Emma. He hesitated, then awkwardly patted my shoulder. I'm sorry, Helen, about everything. After he left, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the street where Madison had once ridden her bike with training wheels, where she'd waited for the school bus, where she'd received her first kiss from the Thompson boy when she thought I wasn't watching. My phone rang as twilight settled over the neighborhood. Madison's name flashed on the screen. Mom, She sobbed when I answered. Everything's falling apart. David's not answering. The bank froze our accounts. I need a place to stay while I sort this out. Her voice sounded small, like the child who'd come to me with skinned knees and broken toys, expecting me to fix everything. But this wasn't a scraped knee or a shattered doll. This was a life deliberately broken by her own hands. I'm sorry, Madison, I said softly, but sometimes the absence of words is the only mirror left for someone who has already broken all the others. I hung up. Then I turned off my phone, poured another small measure of John's scotch, and raised my glass to the darkening sky. You were right to protect me, love, I whispered. But who will protect her from herself? 3 weeks later, I returned to Dr. Richards' office for my follow-up appointment. The waiting room was just as I remembered it. Faded blue chairs, outdated magazines, that antiseptic smell that clings to the back of your throat. But I was different. Something had shifted inside me, like furniture rearranged in a familiar room. Not unrecognizable, just reconfigured. The receptionist, Brenda, according to her name tag, smiled warmly as I signed in. Mrs. Sullivan, how are you today? Better than expected, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. I settled into a chair and picked up a dog-eared copy of People magazine, not really seeing the celebrity faces on its cover. My mind wandered to the quiet of my home, where I'd spent the past weeks slowly restoring order. Milton had helped me arrange for the return of my furniture from the storage facility where Madison had sent it. Mrs. Hensley and other neighbors had pitched in, bringing casseroles and helping hands. The house was becoming mine again, one recovered treasure at a time. Helen Sullivan, a nurse in purple scrubs, called my name, interrupting my thoughts. In the examination room, she took my vitals with practiced efficiency. Blood pressure's much better today, she noted. 130/82. I've been sleeping better, I offered. She smiled. That'll do it. The doctor will be in shortly. Left alone, I studied the anatomy chart on the wall, tracing the illustrated heart with my eyes. John had died of heart failure, cruelly ironic for a man who had loved so generously. In those final weeks, I'd become intimately familiar with the language of medicine: ejection fractions, ventricular arrhythmias, beta blockers, words that tried and failed to quantify the slow dimming of a life. Dr. Richards entered with the same brisk energy I remembered, white coat flapping like wings. He was younger than most doctors who treated patients my age, maybe 45, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind rimless glasses. Mrs. Sullivan, he greeted me, glancing at his tablet. How's that chest pain we discussed last time? Gone, I said. Completely gone. He raised an eyebrow. Really? That's excellent. The medicine must be working well. I shook my head. I haven't been taking it. This caught his attention. He set down the tablet and studied me. You haven't been taking the prescribed medication. Mrs. Sullivan, with your family history. It wasn't my heart, I interrupted gently. It was grief and anger and the weight of letting myself be diminished. Dr. Richards leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. His expression was curious rather than judgmental. What happened, if you don't mind my asking? Last time you were here, you received a rather upsetting phone call. The memory of that day, Madison's cold voice, the shock, the hollow laughter that had so concerned him, felt distant now, like a scene from someone else's life. My daughter tried to sell my house out from under me, I explained. But she couldn't. It was in my name only thanks to my late husband's foresight. I see, he said carefully. And this resolved your chest pain? I laughed then. Not the desperate, manic laugh of our last meeting, but something genuine and warm that bubbled up from a place I thought had gone dormant years ago. Doctor, you wouldn't believe the week I've had. My daughter tried to sell my house, failed spectacularly, and in the process revealed a web of lies to her husband, in-laws, and business associates. She had been planning to use the money from my house to fund a new life with her lover, who, by the way, was her real estate agent. Dr. Richards's professional composure cracked. His eyes widened and his mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. For a moment he looked less like a physician and more like a gossip show host who'd just heard the scandal of the season. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began, clearly struggling to formulate an appropriately clinical response. "Please," I waved a hand. "Call me Helen." He coughed, regaining his composure. "Helen, then, that's quite a situation. How are you coping with all of this?" I considered the question seriously. How was I coping? The daughter I'd raised, loved, nursed through chickenpox and heartbreaks, had tried to discard me like outdated furniture. The granddaughter I adored was caught in the crossfire of her parents' imploding marriage. The future I'd imagined, quiet holidays, Sunday phone calls, a dignified aging, had evaporated. "I'm finding my way," I said finally, "day by day." Dr. Richards nodded, then turned to his tablet to make notes. "And physically? Any dizziness, shortness of breath, fatigue?" "None. I feel stronger than I have in years." He looked up, surprised. "That's unusual, given the stress you've been under." "Is it?" I smiled. "Or maybe it's exactly what happens when you stop carrying something heavy you've been holding for too long." The examination continued. Heart, lungs, reflexes. "Doctor, Richards pronounced me in remarkably good health for a woman of 68, who'd recently weathered significant emotional trauma. Your heart is strong," he concluded, removing his stethoscope. "The chest pain appears to have been stress-related, as you suspected. I'd like to adjust your medications, though. The anti-anxiety prescription doesn't seem necessary anymore." As he typed on his tablet, I found myself thinking of John, how he'd insisted on coming to every appointment with me, how he'd taken meticulous notes, how he'd always asked the questions I was too shy to voice. 3 years without him, and I was finally learning to speak for myself. "Dr. Richards," I said suddenly, "do you believe in justice? Not the legal kind, but cosmic justice?" He paused, fingers hovering over the screen. "That's an interesting question from a medical patient. Humor an old woman." He set the tablet aside, giving me his full attention. "I've seen people smoke 2 packs a day and live to 90. I've seen marathon runners drop dead at 40. So no, I don't believe the universe deals out fair hands." He smiled slightly. "But I do believe we create meaning from what we're dealt. Does that answer your question?" I nodded, satisfied. "It does. Thank you." As I gathered my purse to leave, Dr. Richards cleared his throat. "If you don't mind my asking, what will happen to your daughter now?" I paused at the door. "She's gone to stay with a cousin in Arizona. Says she needs space to heal." The words tasted bitter on my tongue. "Her husband is filing for divorce. Her in-laws have cut her off financially. The life she knew is over. And how do you feel about that?" His voice held genuine curiosity, not clinical detachment. I considered the question, searching for the truth within myself. Sad, relieved, angry, peaceful. I met his eyes. "All of it, sometimes within the same minute." He nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds remarkably healthy, actually." As I walked toward the exit, a thought struck me. I turned back to find him still watching me, a puzzled expression on his face. "You know what's funny, Doctor? The day she called to tell me she'd sold my house, I laughed so hard you thought I'd gone crazy." I smiled, feeling the weight of irony. But I wasn't crazy. I was waking up. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The autumn sun slanted through the windshield, warming my face. I thought of Madison, somewhere in the desert southwest, surrounded by landscapes as empty as her bank accounts. I thought of Emma, who'd called me twice this week, her young voice filled with confusion about why her mother had left. I thought of John, who'd loved us both imperfectly but completely. Then I started the engine and drove home, to my house, with its creaking porch steps and faded wallpaper and memories in every corner. My house, where I belonged. My house, which nobody could sell but me. The evening sky was painted in watercolor shades of purple and orange as I settled into John's leather chair. 6 months had passed since Madison's betrayal. 6 months of healing, rebuilding, and unexpected new beginnings. The house around me had slowly transformed, much like I had. The empty spaces left by the movers had been filled again, though not always with the same pieces. Some things, once taken, couldn't be returned exactly as they were. Sometimes you had to find new treasures to fill the gaps. Outside my window, spring was asserting itself with characteristic Vermont stubbornness. Crocuses pushed through patches of lingering snow, and the maple trees were heavy with buds. John had always loved this time of year, the promise of warmth after the long, hard winter. I ran my fingers along the worn leather of the chair's armrest, feeling the spot where his elbow had rested for countless evenings as he read legal briefs or mystery novels or the Sunday paper. Some nights, I still felt him here beside me, a comforting presence just beyond the edge of vision. On the desk before me sat the brown leather portfolio, John's final gift to me. I'd placed it there deliberately tonight, along with a glass of his favorite scotch and the reading glasses I no longer pretended not to need. The time had come for one last conversation with my husband. Inside the portfolio, beneath the deed that had saved my home, was an envelope I hadn't opened since John's death. He'd given it to me the night before he passed, whispering, "For when you need it most, Helen, not before." In those raw first days of grief, I'd tucked it away, unable to face whatever final words he'd left me. In the chaos of Madison's betrayal, I'd forgotten about it entirely. But tonight, sorting through the portfolio, I'd found it again, cream-colored paper with my name written in John's precise handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of John's legal stationery covered in his distinctive slanted script. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've faced something that's shaken you to your core. I wish I could be there to hold your hand through whatever storm has come your way. Since I can't, these words will have to do. I've loved you for 40 years, through better and worse, richer and poorer, sickness and health. I've watched you laugh, cry, rage, and forgive. I know every line of your face, every story in your heart, and I know this: you are stronger than you believe. Helen, I made sure the house is yours alone because I've watched Madison over the years. I've seen her become someone I barely recognize, someone who measures worth in dollars and appearances. I've seen how she looks at you, at us, at this house, like we're relics holding her back. I hoped she would change, find her way back to the compassionate girl we raised. But if you're reading this, perhaps she hasn't. If one day she tries to take your home, your dignity, your place in this world, remember, the love we share isn't in the gestures everyone sees, but in the quiet papers signed on rainy afternoons. It's in the planning, the protecting, the silent promises kept. Whatever has happened, whatever pain she's caused you, remember two things. First, you deserve to stand your ground. Second, forgiveness is not the same as allowing yourself to be diminished. I love you, Helen Sullivan. I loved you the moment I saw you in that red dress at Martha Coleman's New Year's party in 1972. I loved you through every argument, every compromise, every joy, every hardship. I love you still, wherever I am now. Find your way forward. It may not be the path you expected, but I trust you to make it beautiful. Always yours, John. Tears streamed down my face, dropping onto the paper. I could hear his voice in every word, feel his presence in the room more strongly than I had since his passing. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known what might happen and had tried to prepare me from beyond the grave. I wiped my eyes and raised the glass of scotch in a silent toast. "You were right, old man," I whispered to the empty room that didn't feel empty anymore. About everything. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. I carefully folded John's letter and returned it to the portfolio before making my way to the front door. David stood on my porch, looking tired but resolute. Behind him, Emma waited by the car, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," David said. "Emma has a school project on family history. She wanted to interview you, if that's all right." I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. "Of course it's all right. Come in, both of you." Emma bounded up the steps, throwing her arms around my waist. "Grandma, I brought my recorder and everything. Dad says you know all the best stories." Over her head, I met David's eyes. In the months since Madison's departure, he'd brought Emma for dinner every other Sunday. We'd developed a new kind of family bond, one built on mutual respect and shared concern for the bright-eyed child between us. "Any word?" I asked quietly as Emma raced ahead into the house. David shook his head. "Still in Arizona, according to her last email. The divorce will be final next month." He hesitated. "She asked about coming to see Emma for her birthday." A complex emotion washed over me. Not quite forgiveness, not quite anger. Something in between, something still finding its shape. "What did you tell her?" "That she could come for the day. Supervised visit." His jaw tightened. "It's the best I can do right now." I nodded. Madison had broken so many things, but her relationship with her daughter didn't have to be one of them. Not permanently, at least. That would be one bridge I wouldn't burn for her, no matter what she'd done to me. In the kitchen, Emma was already setting up her little recording device at the table. "Grandma, I need to know everything. How you met Grandpa, what Mom was like as a kid, all of it." I sat across from her, studying her eager face. She had John's eyes, thoughtful and kind. Whatever mistakes Madison had made, she'd given me this extraordinary grandchild, this continuation of our family story. "Well," I began, "it all started at a New Year's Eve party in 1972. I was wearing a red dress that your great-grandmother thought was much too bold." As I spoke, sharing our family history with this child who would carry it forward, I felt something settle into place inside me. The house around us, my house, had become more than just walls and a roof. It had become a haven again, not just for me, but for Emma, for David, for the memory of John, even, perhaps someday, for a chastened and changed Madison. In the months since that fateful phone call in the doctor's office, I turned the second bedroom into a proper space for Emma's weekend stays. I joined a widow's support group at the community center. I'd started volunteering at the library, reading to children on Saturday mornings. I'd planted a new garden in the backyard, with vegetables and flowers mingled together in cheerful defiance of conventional gardening wisdom. Life had moved forward in ways I never could have predicted. Not always easily, not always painlessly, but inexorably forward nonetheless. Later that night, after David and Emma had gone, I returned to John's study. I picked up his letter again, running my fingers over the words that had waited so patiently for me to be ready to receive them. The love we share isn't in the gestures everyone sees, but in the quiet papers signed on rainy afternoons. Outside my window, a gentle spring rain began to fall, pattering against the glass in a soothing rhythm. I smiled, feeling John's presence all around me. "I'm finding my way forward," I whispered to him. "And you're right. It's not the path I expected, but I'm making it beautiful, one day at a time." Life teaches us its most profound lessons in the moments we least expect. When my daughter tried to sell my house from under me, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, and a protection my husband had left behind. Sometimes the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us deepest, and the quiet papers signed on rainy afternoons become our most powerful shields. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted Madison immediately, or would you have waited as I did for the truth to reveal itself? Would you find it in your heart to leave the door open for reconciliation, knowing that family bonds, though stretched and frayed, are never fully broken? In the end, our choices define not just our circumstances, but who we truly are. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the quiet heroism of ordinary lives. Remember, sometimes the strongest thing we can do is simply stand our ground and say, "This is mine, and you cannot take it from me."